I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this exciting session that Anthony has planned. I'm Hannah. I am the head of marketing here at PharmaForce, and I'll be here to help moderate the chat. If we do put polls out, I'll help answer the polls for you publicly and also take your questions and pose them either to Anthony or Justin, who's also with us. So you're very familiar with Anthony. I'm sure you're familiar with Justin as well. Justin is our VP of National Sales. So hello, Justin. I'm going to pass it over to you, and then you'll be hearing from Anthony as well as he walks you through today's presentation called 340B Legislative Pulse Check. What's new, what's changed, and what's next? So if you'd like to go ahead and use the chat, and I'd love to know where people are from while we're waiting for people to join in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Hannah. Like Hannah said, I'm Justin Rowland, the Vice President of National Sales at PharmaForce. So we appreciate you all joining again for one of our monthly webinars. I guess you would say sometimes we do it a little more frequently than we have in the past, but thank you all for my returning guests. Thank you for joining again. For everyone that's new, our format is Anthony will present good content. I will make jokes and sometimes throw in some good content. And we will take Q&A in the end. You can always use the Q&A function to write out your questions, and we'll address those in the end. Again, 30 minutes to 45 minutes of really good content, and then we will jump over to the Q&A piece. Really appreciate you joining again, and I will pass it over to Anthony Velasquez.
All right, thank you both. Let me go ahead and share, and then I'll do a quick introduction and then kind of go from there. So I'm going to go and share my screen and hopefully do that without any issues. Can I get a confirmation, Justin, that you can see?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so here we go.
It's not big though.
Boom. How about that?
That'll work.
Okay, cool. All right, so everyone who's joining us today, thank you so much for joining us. Introduced a little bit about myself. My name is Anthony Velasquez. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at PharmaForce. Been at PharmaForce for the last 6 years. Prior to that, I had worked on a covered entity side. So in total, I've been in the 340B space going on a decade and a half now. I know I look very young, but it is true. And I started my 340B journey at a federally qualified health center. From there, I went on and worked at a couple of dish entities. And then I spent the last 6 years of my professional career at a third-party administrator where we provide technology platforms for covered entities, pharmacies, in order to manage the 340B programs, mixed use, contract pharmacy, et cetera. So really excited to be sharing this. We do these webinars. Our goal is to educate. Our goal is to provide value to you so that at the end of this, you feel like you learned something new. And that's what we're hoping for. I have that unique background of having been a 340B compliance manager at several entities and also having been on the technology side of things. So, I've developed sort of that perspective of having seen multiple sides of the 340B world and am able to hopefully share something that's helpful to you. As you know, and I don't have to remind you that the world of 340B is crazy right now. It is moving very, very fast. Things are changing very quickly. So we have focused a lot of time. I want to say, 50 to 75% of the webinars that we've done in the last 6 months have been around what's going on in the world of 340B. If you all remember, a couple of months ago, we even had someone on from the state of Mississippi who helped champion that state contract pharmacy access bill in that state that's gone into effect. And it hasn't been without its fireworks for sure. So what I want to do at the end of this is make sure that you understand sort of where we're at, where are things at from a state level perspective, a federal perspective, and give you sort of, just a status update today on where things are at. Before I do that, because of the type of content that I'm sharing, I will need to provide this disclosure because of everything that's going on from a legal perspective with the lawsuits that are involved in terms of this content. So, basically just sharing that these views do not reflect an official position. A lot of this is going to be opinionated commentary from me. I'm not providing legal advices or representation to anything. And anything that you hear today is pretty much my personal opinion as just a commentator and just kind of, spending hours and hours and hours consuming this content and, studying this and reading a lot about this in order to share it with you. So now we got that boring stuff out of the way. Let's get into the good stuff. So today we're going to cover 4 major buckets of things. So we're going to talk about the manufacturer restrictions and what's going on in that world. That is moving so quickly that it's hard to really keep up with. And I don't even know how entities can keep up with everything that's going on in that world. I really don't. We're going to talk about the contract pharmacy access bills and the successes, the challenges, and everything that's going on. We're going to talk about the lawsuits and the legal battles. It is an immense amount of time and resources that is being spent in lawsuits, filing injunctions, trying to stop contract pharmacy access bills, even some stuff going up to the Supreme Court. Never thought that would be a thing, but that is a thing. There's a 340B lawsuit or case that is trying to be brought to the Supreme Court. I'll share a little bit more about that. And then the federal legislative updates and what's going on in that world is where we will finish off. So again, I hope that you get a lot of good information from this. One of the things that I encourage you to do is feel free to take some of this information and share it with your committee. If you have, like myself, when I worked on the covered entity side, we had monthly committee meetings where that would include the CEO, CFO, compliance officer, the pharmacy department, finance department, and other areas of the hospital and the organization, and I would share sort of what's going on from a federal perspective, what's going on just 340B at large. So feel free to take some of this content, use it for those presentations. If you're a 340B coordinator, manager that leads any type of committee meeting, feel free to use some of this content for those purposes to help inform and educate your team, your C-suite, and others as to what's going on in the 340B space. All right, so let's start with manufacturer restrictions. What is the latest? Listen, I do not blame any of you that are on this call listening to this if you haven't been keeping up with everything, because it is impossible, and I would dare say that. It is impossible to keep up with everything. So let me just tell you what we know so far, and from a lot of the content, a lot of reading, a lot of different things that are going on with different clients and things that I'm aware of and part of. So here's where we're at. There's continuing to be new restrictions and policy updates. I'll share a slide with you next where you're going to see just in the last 2 months, over 10, close to 20 different types of manufacturer policy restrictions or updates. All right. So think about that. Now, if you are a 340B manager or coordinator at a hospital and you have to maintain this list of new updates and policy changes and all this other stuff going on, like how do you even do that, right? So though that continues to be the world, that continues to be sort of the new world of 340B as those things continue to expand, continue to change. It's really imposing. Here, my bullet point number 2 I want to point out, it's imposing a tremendous burden on covered entities. Covered entities are having a really hard time keeping up with all of these. Talked to a covered entity that was telling me they spend 1 to 2 hours a day just resolving issues, right? So if you're doing this correctly, we're probably going to come out with a webinar on kind of like a step-by-step on how to really monitor all of this. I think will be good. But if you're doing this correctly, you have to audit your invoices, right? So you have to audit your purchasing invoices to see that you're paying the right 340B pricing. If you lose pricing, then you might go to the wholesaler. The wholesaler is going to send you to the manufacturer. You go to the manufacturer is going to send you to 340B ESP. You go to 340B ESP. They make it extremely difficult, almost impossible for you to actually get an answer and not, go around and have to spend hours following up. What's the status of this? What's going on with this? On top of facing a significant amount of, accusations or threats or notices, whatever you want to call them, of you're over purchasing, you're at risk of losing pricing, you've lost pricing, now you got to get it restored, there's no transparency. So what we continue to see is just a world of complexity that unfortunately is hurting covered entities because it's really hard to keep up with all of the changes that are happening on a regular basis. A lot of these changes is that a lot of this is fueled by the U.S. Court of Appeals decision and the ruling that came out in May 21st. So there was a ruling that was pending. If you're following this stuff, like I do, but there was a ruling that had been, pending most of 2023. In December of 2023, we thought that it was going to come out. It didn't. It went on and on and on and on. And finally, in May, it came out that the U.S. Court of Appeals of D.C. ruled in favor of the manufacturers. And basically, at its basic level, without getting too much into the details, it was that manufacturers can apply some sort of restrictions. Basically, that's what the ruling said. But it didn't really, clarify a lot, other than just to say, yes, manufacturer, the 340B law doesn't prevent manufacturers from applying any type of restriction, something like that. So that this has been viewed as, from an industry consensus, this has been viewed as like a fuel of a lot of this activity, right? That manufacturers now have felt a sort of a renewed energy to impose restrictions, to make it more difficult, make it more complex, in terms of providing further reduction of access of 340B pricing across your contract pharmacy network. So that's sort of like where we are, and that just continues to just develop, with different restrictions, different policy updates, different things to follow. So it just continues to be, just a very complex situation for covered entities, where in some cases you're talking about 10, 15 hours of work a week, depending on your entity size. If you're a bigger entity, it might even be more, that you now have to accommodate already. And you might be a covered entity that doesn't have a lot of resources, and we're already running on a slim team. Now you have to accommodate this, completely new and completely complex workflow of accommodating all of this. So that's sort of like the state of where we are. Just quickly, in June, there was a 35th manufacturer that added restriction in July, 36th and 37th. So we're now at 37 unique manufacturers that have proposed or that have published some sort of restrictions to contract pharmacies across the U.S. of entities that are eligible for 340B. Justin, I'm about to come to you with something, but I don't know what maybe you could tell us what you're hearing from entities too, as you're talking to a significant amount of entities. I know that I just got a question recently about just ESP denying claims, and just a lot of different things that are going on in that world. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but just the constant changes are something that I'm hearing about a lot, in for entities.
Really just the difficulty around pricing being correct of what's being submitted to ESP. They're getting pushback of the wholesale has this, you have this, and the rejections. And so it's, like you said, they have to stay on it, and you have to be able to see that pricing, and you have to review invoices, auditing everything. Yep. It's going to take a full-time person for almost every covered entity to keep up with this stuff, especially if you're a hospital that has all these restrictions on you.
Hey, we had a question come in, Anthony. I was wondering if you could answer, just for those that might be a little bit newer to 340B. Could you give a sentence or two on why there are restrictions to begin with?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, the restrictions, I want to say, if I remember correctly, started in 2020, around that time frame, something like that, and it was essentially was the manufacturer's interpretation that the 340B pricing does not need to be offered to an expanded contract pharmacy network. They sort of came out with, first they wanted to get the data. They just wanted entities to submit their 340B eligible claims data through this process of this, third-party software that then they could reduce duplicate discounts. So that's kind of how it started. Of like, we're requesting you to submit data. If you submit data, we'll give you pricing. And then it evolved to, well, we're going to only give you pricing at one contract pharmacy. Then it was like, we'll give you pricing at one contract pharmacy, but if you have an in-house pharmacy, then we won't give you pricing at more than your in-house pharmacy. And it just evolved into all different sorts of agreements. Then it went into, you can get pricing at a contract pharmacy if it's less than 40 miles away from the parent entity. So they got crazy, and they got out of hand. But that is what a manufacturer say. The manufacturers will say is, we are attempting to reduce the amount of duplicate discounts. We don't have the data, so we want entities to submit the data to us so that we can then, prevent duplicate discounts, paying, multiple discounts on the same drug is essentially what the manufacturers will say. But that has made it that the entities are now hurting and suffering and have lost billions and billions of dollars of 340B savings that they otherwise had to operate their hospitals and grantee sites, which is the intention of the 340B legislation when it went into effect. I know that was a kind of like a long-winded answer, Hannah, but it was like I couldn't just answer it like in a one-sentence way. But hopefully that's clear.
No, I appreciate it. And Anthony, just to add a little bit of context, if you could, from the 340B patient side, I know you've obviously been on the front lines yourself. What does this mean for patients that maybe have transportation issues if they're only limited to a single pharmacy that's within 40 miles?
Yeah, I mean, the patient is impacted in multiple ways. And I think sometimes the thought is that the patient is only impacted because, the patient now has to travel to the designated pharmacy to access 340B pricing on a prescription. But it's more than that, because the savings that the entity was generating from the 340B transactions was being used to provide additional services to that patient, additional discounts to that patient, services at a reduced discount to that patient. So there's multiple ways where that the patient is hurt by this. But one of the ways is that in rural communities, patients have to travel farther, have to go through more hoops in order to obtain drugs at a 340B pricing, where and some of the manufacturers will say this, the entity, they would agree that the entity passes the 340B savings to the patient. And some of the manufacturers have expressed that that's what they want, but then it goes further into, well, that's the only way that the 340B program should be handled, which is not true. It's not, that wouldn't, we wouldn't say that was the intention of the program. That's clearly not. But yeah, the patients are hurt significantly by, even in some communities, Hannah, the entire hospital being at risk of closing because of losing a significant amount of 340B savings. So, all right, so let's keep going. Here's just a list. I just kind of we have our own at Pharma, we have our own, cheat sheet of things that we track, policy updates. You go on 340B ESP, and there's a resources page that has a ton of these policy updates and letters and things like that. If you're a primary contact, you're for your entity, you're getting that data, getting those emails. But this is just July and August. All right, so this is like a very small sample size. But if you add it in June here, and let's say we had the whole summer, you're talking about on a monthly basis, you're having to manage 10, 11, 12 possible different policy changes that might impact your program in some way, right? And then one of these policy changes, like you might get a letter where, hey, we are expanding your contract pharmacy, we're allowing you to add another pharmacy, or we're excluding your state because of a contract pharmacy access bill. There's a lot of work that goes into then taking the steps to make sure that your program reflects that. Like there's a lot of work that goes into this. But this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but this is just what's happened in the last 2 months. So a lot has changed, and a lot continues to change. Here's an interesting thing that I want to point out in some of these letters, and that is they just get more and more complex. Like if you look at this one from Organon on August the 6th, it says, notice the 340B entities, 340B covered in Kansas, Maryland, Mississippi, and West Virginia. Okay, so see page 2. Notice the 340B covered entity in Louisiana and Arkansas. See, page 3. Notice the 340B entities in Minnesota. See page 4. Notice the 340B entities in Missouri. See page 5. How do you even manage all of this is beyond me. It's very complex, very difficult to do, and often requires additional resources. So is the Merck one the same way. And essentially, like, I don't know where it goes from here. Like if you know, I don't know if I could just take a guess of where it's going. I don't know where it goes from here. Like I don't know. At this point does this become just a list where like the manufacturers have to provide a different type of policy for every state? You know, like it's just like really getting out of hand, sadly. So, anyways. Changing topics to the contract pharmacy access bill. So we got the restrictions. Okay. So bucket one was, hey, here's what's going on. Okay. What's going on is that the aggressive restrictions of 340B pricing to covered entities that are in many cases have their doors open because of the 340B program. There continues to be that sort of aggressive approach from the manufacturers to find ways to restrict access to the 340B pricing, to make it more difficult, to make it more complex, to add administrative burdens to covered entities in order to overcome this. Now, there have been, sort of taking, if I was to take it to the timeline of this, there had been at the beginning, the covered entities were thinking, hey, we're going to hope that HRSA steps in and does something about this. HRSA tried and basically was not able to do anything. Then it was, hey, we're going to hope that there's a legislative approach to this, there was a legislative approach to this, and maybe that this can be protected via via Congress. That really takes a significant amount of effort, and that has not really panned out. Then it was like, well, hey, we have these lawsuits where we'll let the courts kind of decide, right? And then now we have almost like a split decision where there's been rulings that have been pro manufacturers, ruling that have been pro covered entities, and now we're just in a mess and in a web of lawsuits all over the place. And then there's been this approach kind of came up and it started with the state of Arkansas. Kudos to them if you're in the House. But it was these contract pharmacy access bill. There was these state level bills that could be passed in order to help covered entities access 340B pricing. So the state level legislation continues to be it's the most successful strategy right now in really helping covered entities. If it wasn't for this effort at the state level, at least right now we have 8 different states that have enacted a contract pharmacy access bill. In those states, there will be no access to 340B pricing in the way that there is today. And even then, it's a little bit, it's a little bit at the mercy of the courts in some ways. But this continues to be the most effective legislation. It is similar to how I stated earlier that the aggressive approach of manufacturers was fueled by the decision in May by the district court in DC. There was a decision in March of 2024 by the 8th District Court, basically upholding that Arkansas did have the right to pass this contract pharmacy access bill, although it was met with a lot of pushback from pharma and other groups. But there is a court decision that essentially sided with the covered entities, and that has sort of made it possible that other states, especially states under the jurisdictions of the 8th District Court, to pass contract pharmacy access bills. So that has continued to be a huge success. Just in July, Missouri became the 8th state to enact a contract pharmacy access bill. That goes into effect August 28th. There's like a whole mess where like the governor is not going to sign it. So if the governor doesn't sign it, it's going to go into effect. So that's huge news. That's great news. There's other states that are introduced bills. There's some that doesn't seem like any action has happened, and some that efforts have recently failed in certain states. So keep an eye on this. I did a webinar a couple of months ago on how to be an advocate for this, and just encouraging covered entities to be involved in any way that you can to advance some of these things, because I think you play a key role in that. But keep an eye on that because that's very important. All right. Let me move on because I have a lot of content and time is quickly flying. So here's my prediction real quick. Because of this ruling was at this court that has jurisdiction over a couple of different states. There's been a bill introduced in Iowa and Nebraska. So I'm predicting that maybe those are the 2 next states that will see a successful pass of a contract pharmacy protection bill. So hopefully that's the case, that Iowa and Nebraska would be next, as they have sort of like the best defense because of this case that was unanimously voted in that the courts that oversee those states. All right, cool. So shifting gears to what's going on in the lawsuits and legal battles. I know this is not the most exciting stuff. I'm really trying to make this I know I sound like a gloom and doom, and I'm trying to make this content a little bit more exciting, because there's not much excitement to share. There's not much good news, unfortunately, as it relates to this particular topic, compared to other topics that I like to speak on. But I think this stuff is important. Like, if you don't know this and you're managing a 340B program, it's important for you to be educated. Those of you that are on the line that are working at 340B covered entities, pharmacies, and other stakeholders. So what's going on here? I'm not gonna spend too much time on here, because this stuff is not the most exciting stuff. But basically, there are these two new lawsuits that have recently come out challenging 340B contract pharmacy access bills. Remember, this is the same type of a lawsuit, or the same sort of approach that was attempted in Mississippi, and essentially the approach is, hey, let's stop these bills from going into effect while this lawsuit kind of unfolds. And that's kind of the approach of, like, let's just tie it up in legal battles. It was going on in Missouri by Novartis, and Maryland by AbbVie. There's just like, as soon as these bills are passed, the state legislative house, and then are signed by the governors and all that, and it goes through that entire process, then boom, here comes pharma with a lawsuit. Something very interesting that I had that actually came across, that I had not seen, and I'm curious if there's a covered entity on here on this webinar that will be willing to share and come on and speak at the end of the webinar. But AstraZeneca has actually subpoenaed covered entities, pharmacies in Mississippi and Arkansas, and are basically looking at auditing the CE Pharmacy TPA administration. So they're looking to sort of have some sort of insight that they could use in some of the court cases to I'm not sure what the goal is, to be honest, but essentially they want to be able to present some of that evidence, or whatever they think they might find in terms of the acquisition and distribution of drugs in that contract pharmacy relationship. So I've been asking around, talking to a few entities that, and none of the ones that I talked to had heard about this. So I'm curious how this happened and how AstraZeneca chose or selected. You probably can't talk about it because it's a subpoena anyway. So so there's hospitals in some of these states that are facing this over all of this lawfare. So, I mean, that's new. I hadn't heard something like that. I know, like, manufacturers will attempt to do sort of good faith audits and things like that, but that's a new one, that covered entities and pharmacies are now being sort of like pulled into this, this battle between manufacturers and states and others in a way that we haven't seen before. So that's interesting. I don't know how that's going to unfold, and if I learn anything new, I'll certainly, plan and discuss internally about sharing that with you all. Now, this thing has escalated. Okay, so it went from, hey, here's an injunction lawsuit just to stop this. Then it's, hey, we're going to subpoena cover entities and pharmacies. Now it's a pharma group that is a very strong lobbying group, is now petitioning the Supreme Court to overturn the Arkansas 340B contract access bill. So this is in discussion. I don't think it's going to go before the Supreme Court, but it's that petition has happened. So it's very it's very interesting just how this thing continues to escalate, and I just don't know where really it's all going to go. So, Justin, I'll actually, have you heard that? Like, did you hear about this? Like, entities being, I know you got a lot of friends in the industry, a lot of connections, but have you heard this?
I have not. That was the first, and I have not heard any cover entities say anything about that. So
yeah, I don't even know if they could. Like, I don't even know if it's like a legal thing. I don't know if an entity could even share like publicly that has happened. But
we have someone in the chat speaking about being subpoenaed in Arkansas. I don't know if they have, but I asked her if she'd be willing to come speak. I don't know if she's affected directly.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Maybe could be hearing it from. Yeah, please don't do anything that your entity would not approve of.
Yes.
We don't want to get anyone in trouble. So.
Do we have any farmer representatives on the webinar? That like to join
we do. We have both sides of the proverbial house represented.
Yeah, they should weigh in on the chat and let us know
Yeah,
why
it's
it's
the farmer
important
side.
to limit access to the underserved patients of the country. I'd love to hear their side of it.
Yeah, I talked to I did talk to a gentleman at a manufacturer and asked if he'd be willing to come and have a conversation about some of these things. But because of all the legal stuff, I don't think they can. But
maybe you just get sued for so many years, you get tired of it, you just want to see the other side of it. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to get some to kind of hear, like, the farmer perspective. I've been fortunate enough to get some of that insight, just having been part of conversations with different folks that are part of doing some lobbying and at the Senate level. So I've gotten to be in conversations and understanding that a lot of the fuel behind this is around duplicate discounts, and it's not even around what we think. Like when I think duplicate discounts, I always thought it was just Medicaid, but it is beyond that. It is duplicate discounts on the private payer level. It's a very difficult conversation and complex conversation to have, but at a basic level, manufacturers feel like they have this big problem. Some estimate is between $10 to $15 billion where they're paying duplicate discounts to PBMs on privately paid drugs where the 340B is also being given. So I think it's important for those of us that are part of this to be educated on that. So definitely welcome a manufacturer if they want to come up and discuss. All right, so let's wrap this up. It's 2:31. Let's try to wrap this up on the federal legislative updates. What is going on with our friends in Congress and our representatives? So, as you all know, if you've been joining, our webinar for a while, you will know these. You will know these things because I've shared about this. I've talked about this, but there are 3 pieces of legislation that are floating in the House and in the Senate regarding 340B that has significant implications for us and from a 340B perspective. The first one is the Sustained 340B Act. It is a bipartisan piece of legislation that was drafted. Then they asked for request for information, and RFI was put out where entities and manufacturers and others kind of provided their thoughts on the sections of the bill. The bill it's really a mixed bag. It is, out of all of them, it is the biggest overhaul, I would say, of the 340B program. Yes, it does include expanding contract pharmacy access, so it would help, at least in the draft version. It would help with the challenges that covered entities are facing. But there's also some very interesting components of that bill. I encourage you to go into our YouTube channel and listen to our webinars from a few months ago where I talked about this. But there's some components of the bill that propose a national clearinghouse. There's some components of the bill that propose a significant amount of reporting requirements for covered entities and things like that. But it is a bill that has a significant amount of push from different lobbying groups, and is a bipartisan bill with some big players in the Senate. Then there's the 340B Patients Act. If you all know, when we were at the 340B conference, the bill was expected to be announced. It was introduced. I want to say it was last summer. Time flies, but it was supposed to be last summer. It was supposed to be introduced. It didn't. It finally did get introduced. It is a very simple, very clean bill that focuses on expanding contract pharmacy access and getting that written very, I would say, more explicitly into law. It is my favorite bill. Is the bill that I think is sort of the cleanest and kind of gets to the point where it helps covered entities. Then there's the 340B Access Act. This is another bill introduced in the House of Representatives. It's a bill drafted by a combination of NAC and some pharma groups. That's more what what folks are saying is it's a more grantee-friendly bill than it is a hospital, than considering hospitals and hospitals' eligibility in the program. So, there's a little bit of a back and forth there of, hospitals feeling like they were left out of those conversations in terms of the pieces of legislation that are proposed there. So these are the three big pieces of legislation that are in Congress right now. Some of the new updates that we've heard is that the 340B Patients Act is now up to 9 co-sponsors. So it's gaining a lot of traction. This is very good. The more co-sponsors that it has, the better. So it's very good. I call it the clean bill because it's just really a simple piece of legislation that just addresses the protection of contract pharmacy 340B pricing across the contract pharmacy network. Then we have the Sustain 340B Act, which is delayed. This is the Senate bill. By the way, before I keep going, I do want to say we've expanded these to 45 minutes. So that's why I'm going over the usual 30 minutes. Of those of you that have come and are used to the 30-minute session, these are expanded a little bit just so that we have more time to share the content with you. The Sustain 340B Act has been delayed and may be introduced in the fall, but there's a lot of activity behind this. This one's actually really interesting and want to keep an eye on. There's a ton of activity where big power players in the Senate are behind this bill and actively working on this bill. In August, we're having conversations and actively working on this bill, which is very interesting because, I think I'm down to some of my last slides, because of this increased support for what's called the 340B working table. I don't know if those of you that are on the call have heard about this or are members of this, but this is a very interesting sort of lobbying group or firm, based on things that I was reading. This was started in the end of 2023. Some of the founding members have a mixture of pharma and hospitals and health centers. If you're an entity on this call and you're offended by me putting your name on here, I apologize for that. I'm just reporting what is already public. But this is a working group that is attempting to sort of help foster a positive. I don't think there's anything bad about it, but there's attempting to foster a conversation around 340B that includes sort of all the players in at the same table. This is led by an influential lobbying firm. One of the things that's really interesting about this group is everything that I've been reading is indicating that this group is very supportive of the Sustain 340B Act, which is the one that I was sharing with, that is going to have more pieces of legislation, more overhaul in the 340B program than the other two. It is a much bigger piece of legislation. I want to say 60 to 70 pages long of different ways that the 340B program can be changed, and they've done a lot of work to do that. Some very powerful people are behind this lobbying group. Some people used to work in the Senate. People that the former governor of Utah, the state of Utah, is part of this. So there's some strong power players involved. And Merck and other covered entities have recently joined it. And I think that's why I was reported just very recently. Credit to 340B Report. They're doing some great reporting out there. But Merck and other entities have recently joined this group, so this is gaining a lot of traction, which I think is also, then possibly playing a role in the Sustain 340B Act, kind of having a lot of buzz in the Senate these days. So I think that's it. I think that's all I had to share for today. Justin, I'm gonna turn back to you. I'm ready to take some questions. Hopefully we have some really good questions, but if you're interested in chatting with us, if you got a question, feel free to send that to info@thefarmforce.com. You can visit our website. Encourage you, if you have the 340B. I really appreciate the comments when I was at the conference. I had someone from a hospital say, hey, I have my 340B coordinators watch all your webinars. So I really appreciate that. We post them on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go over there, and I've shared a ton of really good content just to educate 340B professionals on the 340B program. So that is it for me. Justin, I'm turning it back to you. Let me stop sharing here.
We certainly have a lot of questions.
Oh, really?
Been on fire the whole time, so it's definitely a heated topic.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it was Justin stirring up the pot.
That's what I do.
Thanks for the take a bite.
So there's
So,
a question. Oh, sorry. Do
yes.
you mind if I start with the questions?
What now?
Do you mind if I start with the questions?
Oh, absolutely. How about it?
Cool. And then definitely both of you weigh in. I know you both have experience on multiple aspects of this. So we're going to start with a question from Zach. This one's specific to program management, but any ideas on how to approach a situation where a covered entity is in a state without a contract pharmacy access bill, but the entity has contracts with pharmacies in a state that does have an access bill? For example, an entity in Illinois with pharmacies in Missouri. So we're talking about how to manage the program across state lines.
That's a great question, Zach. My understanding is that the contract pharmacy access bills, unless there's something specific about each one of them, applies to the covered entity's home state and where the covered entity is located. So I think it will be difficult to get the manufacturers to provide pricing on those accounts when the accounts are owned by a covered entity in the state of Illinois. So that is the best answer that I got, Zach. That's a really, really good question. That is one of the many questions that have come up with these new contract pharmacy access bills. And if I hear anything different, let's try to get connected somehow, Zach. Send us an email or something so we can get connected. And if I hear anything different, I'd love to share that with you. Justin, you hear anything different, Justin?
The reverse of that would be, what if you're a city in Alabama who has locations in Mississippi, for example? Could you access it for your entire program? I would think not, but.
Oh, that's interesting. Like if you have a child site, you're saying, like if you have a child site, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, those are all questions that I honestly think a lot of these things are questions that are like up to the judgment of the manufacturer, and they could just basically say no. And then you have to go through the hassle of like, well, how do you go through, policing that, and all that other stuff. So great questions. And I hope to have some answers, but a lot of this stuff is very fresh, very new.
Yes. And for those of you asking questions, we do have your email from registration, so I can always pass your info to Justin and Anthony to reach out directly as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. So this one, I'd love to hear Justin chime in first. So during this conversation, the question of PBMs came up. So if pharma is pushing to get back on the 340B program, have they done anything to address PBMs?
They have. I'm not sure about the intricacies of it, but they said they have are attempting to do this. There's also legislation on the other side of it to push back on the PBMs to make them do right, I guess you would say, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys some insight. Okay, this is something from a conversation that I've had. I don't know how I find myself in some of these discussions with, some very powerful people that are lobbying in the Senate and stuff like that. But the PBMs are the real problem, because the PBMs aren't doing anything to prevent the duplicate discounts. But it's easier for the manufacturers to pick on the covered entities because the PBMs control the formulary. All right, so I just gave you some insight you've never heard before, but that's essentially the reason why the manufacturers will aggressively go after the covered entities, because the covered entities are essentially at the mercy of the Public Health Services Act and the 340B regulation. But the truth is that the PBMs have no incentive to really solve the duplicate discount issue. They don't. And yeah, we might need to block that from the recording. But that's the truth. That's the insight that has been shared with me, that there's a $10 to $15 billion issue of duplicate discounts that the manufacturers are not able to go to the PBM and say, hey, figure this out, because the PBMs control whether they're on that formulary or not. So
this is where I put on my marketing hat, Anthony, and say, shameless plug, isn't that why PharmaForce came out with a PBM solution as well?
Yep.
So one of the things we do is we help address that issue very well. We're not going to spend time on it here, but if you are a self-funded employer, then PharmaForce has reduced by about, 45%? for our 340B covered entities across the PPMs.
Yeah, PM, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's next?
So next up, we have, what does pharma do with the data that they're requesting? They ask for the data, but then introduce restrictions.
Yeah, so the public understanding, I would say what's out there of what the purpose of the data is, that you as a covered entity are the only ones privy to this conversation, to this data that says prescription number 12345 is 340B eligible and a 340B discount has been obtained to replenish that product. Okay, then that information is provided to pharma, and then now they're able to compare that to the discounts, the discounts that they are paying, the rebates that they're paying to PBMs, to state Medicaid office, and then are able to then say, oh, we already gave a discount to the covered entity on the 340B side. We're not also going to pay a rebate on this. So they use that data to then say, to then compare the two and say, oh, yep, nope, sorry, state, we're not paying you a rebate. We already gave a 340B discount on that. And hence, it reduces the overall cost of the manufacturer operations. Now, what else are they doing with that data? I don't know, but that is what, that's public of what's going on. And part of the reason is this national clearinghouse, and this is really interesting because there's a lot of even public information and webinars on this. Of the push for this national clearinghouse is to do that, is to basically force entities to submit all their 340B data through a bill in Congress to this now national clearinghouse organization that would sort of come about if the sustained 340B Act is passed. And then that gives the manufacturers all of the insight into the data. And now they can say, oh, now we can fix our $15 billion issue that we think we have because of paying the duplicate discounts, paying a 340B savings and giving a rebate to the PBM, and in some cases, providing a coupon card and in some of those situations.
All right, thank you. Next question. Can you go into more detail describing the scenario of duplicate discount applications outside of Medicaid?
Yeah, so I just mentioned it, Kane, and hopefully, so basically, you have a private insurance. You have, your PBM is PBM X, right? And that PBM has been promised a rebate for having a certain product on their formulary. You go to a 340B contracted pharmacy. That drug is captured as 340B eligible. The covered entity pays a discount, right? Gets a financial benefit from that transaction. But then at the same time, the manufacturer is then sending a rebate to the PBM, your PBM, from your card on that same product. And that is what the manufacturers will say, we want to stop that. And that's not always in the context of Medicaid. That's also in the context of just private payers and the PBM world in general. That'd be my message. All right, cool. Hannah, I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us, and hopefully you found this webinar informational. We will be releasing the recording. Probably gonna have to cut the Q&A, but we will be releasing the recording. Thank you for joining again, and we will talk to you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Much.